Palestine, 1935. A man named Ibrahim tends to his olive trees. He has done this every morning for 20 years. His father did it before him, his grandfather before that. The trees are older than anyone can remember, older than the borders, older than the promises, older than the men who would soon come to decide their fate. Ibrahim does not know what the Balfour Declaration is. He has never heard of Sykes-Picot. He does not read the newspapers that arrive in Jerusalem. He does not attend the meetings in London. He grows olives. He raises his children. He locks his door at night. And he believes that tomorrow will look like today. That was the last thing the old world gave him. The belief that tomorrow would look like today. Part 1. The world Ibrahim didn't know about. While Ibrahim tended his trees, decisions were being made about his land, in rooms he had never entered, by men who had never walked his fields. In 1917, Britain had promised his land to someone else. In 1920, the League of Nations had given Britain the mandate to govern Palestine, not to protect the people who lived there, but to prepare it for something else entirely. Throughout the 1930s, Jewish immigration to Palestine was increasing rapidly. Families fleeing persecution in Europe, people who had nowhere else to go. Ibrahim did not blame them for fleeing. He understood what it meant to be afraid. What he did not understand was why their arrival meant his departure. By 1936, Ibrahim had begun to understand. He joined the Arab Revolt, not because he was a soldier, because his olive trees had been taken, because his neighbor's house had been bulldozed, because the people running his country had promised it to someone else, and because no one had asked him. Part 2. The flags. While Ibrahim was learning what his land meant to others, the rest of the Muslim world was receiving its independence. Iraq in 1932, Syria and Lebanon in 1946, Jordan, a country invented in London, with a king chosen in London, Pakistan in 1947, born in 14 weeks of chaos, 1 million dead in the partition, Indonesia in 1949, Libya in 1951, flags, anthems, constitutions, the language of freedom. But look closer. Iraq independent, British military bases still on Iraqi soil. Egypt independent since 1922, British troops still in the Suez Canal zone. Syria independent, but divided from Lebanon by a French border that made no historical sense. Pakistan independent, but split from its eastern half by 1,000 miles of Indian territory. In Cairo, a king sat on a throne. His name was Farouk. He wore suits made in London. He drove cars imported from Europe. He had been educated abroad. He ruled country that had been independent for 20 years. And in February 1942, British tanks surrounded his palace. The British ambassador walked in and told the king of an independent country who his prime minister would be. Farouk looked at the tanks outside his window and agreed. This was independence, a flag, a king, and foreign tanks parked outside the door. Part 3. The seed becomes a fire back in Palestine. Ibrahim had watched the Arab revolt fail. Britain had crushed it, not with negotiation, with force. 30,000 British troops sent to suppress Palestinian resistance. Palestinian leaders exiled. Palestinian weapons confiscated. The society that might have defended itself in 1948 was broken in 1939. That is what the historian Rashid Khalidi wrote. Palestine was not lost in 1948. It was lost in 1939, when Britain destroyed the very forces that could have defended it. In 1939, Britain issued what it called the White Paper. It promised to limit Jewish immigration. It promised to work toward Palestinian independence. Ibrahim read the words. He was cautious, but he had hope. Then the Second World War began, and everything changed. Part 4. The World. After the war, 6 million Jewish people had been murdered in Europe. The world had witnessed something it could not process, and the pressure for a Jewish state became a force that no government could resist. Britain, caught between its promises to the Arabs and the reality of a post-Holocaust world, did what Britain always did when it had made too many promises to too many people. It handed the problem to someone else. In 1947, Britain told the United Nations, "You decide." On November 29, 1947, the United Nations voted to partition Palestine into a Jewish state and an Arab state. Ibrahim heard the result on a radio in his neighbor's house. He sat in silence for a long time. Then he walked home, locked his door, put the key in his pocket, and told his children, "We will be back by morning." Part 5. Al-Nakba. The Arab armies came. Egypt, Jordan, Syria, Iraq, Lebanon. They told the Palestinian people they were coming to save them. They were not ready. They were divided. They were poorly equipped. They were led by men who answered to foreign powers, not to their own people. The armies that had been installed by Britain and France could not fight the consequence of Britain and France's decisions. What followed was the Nakba, the catastrophe. 530 villages destroyed. More than 62,000 homes demolished. Around 13,000 Palestinians killed. 750,000 people driven from their homes. Ibrahim walked away from his olive trees. He believed he would return. Everyone believed they would return. They took almost nothing, because they were coming back. He never came back. His house was demolished. His olive trees were uprooted. His children grew up in a camp. His grandchildren grew up in the same camp. His great-grandchildren are still there. He died in 1987, still with the key, still waiting. Part 6. The revolution that wasn't the defeat of 1948 shook the Arab world. How had this happened? In Egypt, young military officers had an answer. The regimes were corrupt, foreign, weak. In July 1952, they moved. King Farouk, the king chosen by British tanks, was overthrown. He boarded his yacht and sailed away. A young colonel named Nasser became the voice of a new Arab world. The people celebrated, finally, an Arab leader who spoke for Arabs. What the people did not know was that American intelligence had been in contact with the free officers before the coup. The CIA had its own reasons for wanting Britain out of Egypt. Not for Egypt's sake, for America's. The Cold War was beginning, and Washington needed the Arab world on its side, not Britain's side. The empire had not retreated. It had simply changed its face. Part 7. Suez in 1956. Nasser nationalized the Suez Canal. The crowd in Alexandria erupted. Britain, France, and Israel made a secret plan. Israel would attack. Britain and France would intervene and reclaim the canal. The plan was executed. It looked like the return of colonialism. And then, the United States said no. Eisenhower demanded withdrawal. Britain and France, the empires that had carved up the Muslim world in 1916, backed down. The Arab world celebrated. Nasser was a hero. Egypt had defeated 3 armies, but Egypt had not defeated 3 armies. America had stopped 3 armies, because America had decided that it was time for a new kind of control. Not colonial governors, not military occupations, something cleaner, something that looked like freedom. Part 8. The Pattern. By 1958, Iraq had its own revolution. The British-installed king was overthrown and killed. The streets celebrated. But the new government was already being watched, already being assessed, already being managed from the outside. Because by 1958, this was the pattern. The flags changed. The faces at the palaces changed. The speeches changed. But the oil was still controlled by foreign companies. The armies still depended on foreign weapons. The economies were still structured to serve foreign interests. They had given the Muslim world independence, the way you give a child a toy, to keep them occupied, while the adults hold the real things. Part 9. The Question. Ibrahim's key is still in the hands of his family, a physical object, metal and memory, passed from generation to generation. It opens a door that no longer exists, to a house that was demolished, on land that was renamed, by people who were not there. When Ibrahim locked that door, the flags of the Muslim world fly over capitals from Rabat to Jakarta. Every one of those countries calls itself independent. Every one of those governments calls itself sovereign, and every single one of them is still living in the shadow of decisions made in London and Paris and Washington, by men who were never elected by the people they decided for. This is not ancient history. This is the world we live in. The Nakba is not over. The illusion of independence is not over. And until we understand what was built and how it was built and who built it, we will keep celebrating flags while others hold the keys. Next, Episode 3, The Forgotten Muslims, the Wuggers, the Muslims of Central Asia, the ones the world never talks about. Because the powers that silenced them are still in the room.
Episode 3. The Forgotten Muslims.